2 years fighting cancer. My phone only rang when someone wanted money, but I never thought I'd be sitting alone in a hospital room at 65, watching chemotherapy drugs drip into my veins while my phone remained silent. 2 years ago, I was Catherine Wilson, respected high school English teacher of 30 years, mother of 2, grandmother of 3, and recently widowed after 40 years of marriage to my Robert. I had a comfortable home in Burlington, Vermont, a modest pension, and what I thought was a loving family. Then came the diagnosis, stage 3 ovarian cancer. The doctor's words hit like a physical blow, and my first thought wasn't about my mortality, but about who would be there for me during the fight ahead. The first few weeks after diagnosis were a flurry of activity. My daughter Jessica flew in from Chicago with promises of support. My son Michael drove up from Boston with his wife Vanessa, both making grand statements about being there every step of the way. My sister-in-law Patricia, Robert's younger sister who lived just 20 minutes away, cried and held my hand, swearing she'd never let me face this alone. I believed them all. I had to. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that first month, surrounded by my family as we discussed treatment options. The oak table Robert had restored years ago, now covered with medical pamphlets and insurance forms. Jessica, her blonde hair pulled back in a sensible ponytail, took detailed notes on her iPad, while Michael paced, his anxiety showing in every step. Vanessa sat quietly beside me, her hand occasionally squeezing mine. "Mom, don't worry about a thing," Jessica said, her corporate efficiency kicking in. "We'll work out a schedule. Michael and I will alternate weeks staying with you during chemo. And Patricia can cover the days we can't be here. And I've already researched the best oncologists in the Northeast," Michael added, his phone in hand. "Dr. Brennan at Fletcher Allen has exceptional outcomes for your type of cancer." Patricia nodded vigorously. "And I'll drive you to appointments, help with groceries, whatever you need, Kathy. You were there for Robert until the end. We'll be there for you." I felt tears well up in my eyes, not from fear, but from gratitude. The weight on my shoulders seemed to lighten just a bit. We would face this as a family, just as we'd faced Robert's heart attack 3 years prior. Or so I thought. The first round of chemotherapy was brutal. The nausea came in waves, leaving me weak and barely able to move from my bed to the bathroom. Jessica stayed that first week as promised, working remotely from my dining room, bringing me ginger tea and bland crackers, holding my hair back when I vomited. She made sure I took my medications on schedule, changed my sheets when I soaked them with sweat, and sat beside me reading aloud from my favorite Jane Austen novels when I was too tired to hold a book. "You're going to beat this, Mom," she would say, her voice firm with conviction. "You're the strongest person I know." When Jessica left, Michael arrived with a suitcase and his laptop. He wasn't as naturally nurturing as his sister, but he tried. He cooked simple meals I could barely eat, researched alternative therapies, and awkwardly patted my back during the worst bouts of sickness. "Dad would be proud of how you're handling this," he told me one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, me wrapped in a blanket despite the summer heat. "Remember how he hated hospitals but never complained once during his treatments?" I nodded, missing Robert with a physical ache that rivaled my cancer pain. He would have known exactly what to say, when to offer comfort and when to give space. We had weathered so many storms together. Facing this one without him felt impossibly hard. The second month brought a new routine. My treatments continued every other week, leaving me drained and sick for days afterward. The promised rotation of family support began to show cracks. Jessica called to say she couldn't make her week because of an important client meeting. "But I'll come the following week for sure, Mom, I promise." Michael came, but spent most of his time on conference calls, pacing in the yard with his AirPods in, occasionally poking his head in to ask if I needed anything. Vanessa had stopped coming altogether, citing the children's activities as needing her attention back home. Patricia still visited, bringing casseroles I couldn't eat and gossip from the neighborhood I couldn't focus on. But her visits grew shorter, her excuses more frequent. Bridge club and church committee suddenly became urgent priorities. By the third month, the facade had crumbled entirely. Jessica called rather than visited. Michael texted instead of called. Patricia stopped by once a week for exactly 30 minutes. Just long enough to claim she was helping. My neighbors showed more consistent care than my family, with Mrs. Abernathy from next door bringing fresh flowers every Monday and Mr. Chen from across the street clearing my driveway after every snowfall without being asked. Then came the first call about money. It was Jessica, her voice tense, in a way I recognized from childhood when she wanted something but didn't want to ask directly. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" The perfunctory question barely given time to be answered before she continued. "Listen, Madison got into that dance program in New York we've been hoping for. But the deposit is due next week. It's $5,000, and with Tom's company restructuring and my bonus delayed." I lay in bed, nauseous and exhausted from my treatment the day before, and heard what she wasn't saying. My granddaughter's opportunity was important, of course, but so was the fact that I'd raised a daughter who saw me not as a suffering mother, but as a financial resource. "I can help, Jessica," I said, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow." Her relief was palpable through the phone. "You're the best, Mom. Madison will be so grateful. I'll have her call to thank you." Madison never called. Neither did Jessica to check how I was doing after my treatment. But 3 days later, the money left my account. Michael was next. His call came during a rare good day, when I'd managed to sit in the garden Robert had loved, breathing in the scent of late summer roses and feeling almost human again. "Hey, Mom." His voice had the false cheer I'd come to dread. "How's everything going?" "Better today," I said honestly. "I kept breakfast down and even spent some time outside." "That's great," he said, distracted. I could hear traffic in the background and imagined him calling from his car, multitasking as usual. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something. Vanessa and I are looking at moving the kids to private school. The public schools in our district are having issues, and with college prep becoming so competitive..." The subtext was clear. Private school meant tuition. Tuition meant money. Money they presumed I had, despite the mounting medical bills that arrived in my mailbox with alarming regularity. "How much are we talking about, Michael?" I asked directly, too tired for the dance. He cleared his throat. "About $40,000 a year, for both kids. But it's an investment in their future, Mom. And we thought, since Dad's life insurance and the house are paid off..." I closed my eyes, letting the sunlight warm my face as I considered how to respond. Robert and I had lived frugally, saved diligently for retirement, and paid off our mortgage early. We had planned to travel in our golden years, to see the world we'd been too busy working to explore. Cancer had already stolen those dreams. Now my children wanted to take the financial security we'd built as well. "I'll need to think about it, Michael. My treatment costs are substantial, and I'm not sure what my long-term prognosis looks like yet." His disappointment came through clearly. "Sure, Mom. No pressure. But the enrollment deadline is coming up, and the best schools fill fast." After hanging up, I sat in the garden until the sun began to set, thinking about how my children had become strangers to me. When had money become more important than sitting with their mother during chemotherapy? When had their ambitions for their own children overshadowed their duty to their parent? Patricia's request was the most brazen. She didn't bother with the pretense of checking on my health first. Her text message read simply, "Need to talk about the lake house. Can I stop by tomorrow?" The lake house had been in Robert's family for generations. A simple 3-bedroom cabin on Lake Champlain, where we'd spent summers with the children, teaching them to swim and fish, watching sunsets from the small dock. Robert and Patricia had inherited it jointly from their parents, but Robert had bought out Patricia's share 20 years ago when she was going through a difficult divorce and needed cash. The agreement was clear and legally documented. When she arrived the next day, I was having one of my bad days. I'd lost another 5 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, and my once thick silver hair was coming out in clumps. I wore a scarf around my head, more to contain the fallout than from vanity. Patricia sat at the kitchen table, turning her coffee mug in circles, barely looking at me. "You're looking rested," she lied. I didn't have the energy to pretend. "What about the lake house, Patricia?" She straightened her shoulders. "I've been thinking, Kathy. The lake house really should stay in the family bloodline." I stared at her, not comprehending at first. "It will. Michael and Jessica will inherit it someday." Patricia shook her head slowly. "But they're not really Wilsons, are they? They have Robert's name, but not his blood. My son David, on the other hand, is a true Wilson. The family name should continue through him." The audacity took my breath away. My children had grown up in that cabin, carved their initials into the porch rail, learned to make s'mores at its fire pit, and Patricia wanted to erase their claim because they were adopted. Robert and I couldn't have biological children, Patricia, you know that. But Michael and Jessica are our children in every way that matters. Robert legally bought your share of the cabin. It belongs to our family now. Her face hardened. Robert always felt guilty about having what I didn't. He mentioned several times that he wanted to make things right. "That's not true," I said, feeling a strength rise in me despite my physical weakness. And if he had wanted to change the arrangement, he would have done so legally, with proper documentation. Patricia stood abruptly. "You should think about what Robert would want, about family legacy, especially now with your condition." The implication hung in the air between us. With my condition, meaning with me potentially dying soon, I should reconsider who deserved the family property. I should prioritize blood over the children I'd raised, loved, and who were now too busy to help me through the fight for my life. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. She did, without another word, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the empty house. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at Robert's desk in our bedroom looking through old photo albums by lamplight. Pictures of Jessica on Robert's shoulders at the lake house, laughing as he threatened to toss her into the water. Michael teaching his father how to use a smartphone on the cabin's porch. Family Christmases, graduations, weddings. A lifetime of love captured in fading photographs. I opened the drawer where Robert kept important documents and pulled out our will. We had updated it after his diagnosis, making sure everything was in order. The lake house was explicitly mentioned, to be inherited by our children equally. I ran my fingers over Robert's signature, missing him with a ferocity that brought fresh tears. "What would you do, my love?" I whispered into the quiet room. "They're our children, but they've changed. Or maybe we never truly knew them." The next day brought a text from Jessica asking if I'd considered increasing her inheritance advance, given the circumstances. Michael called to press about the private school tuition again. Patricia sent an email with a lowball offer to take the lake house off my hands while I was dealing with my illness. My phone only rang when someone wanted money. The clarity came during my next chemotherapy session. I sat alone in the treatment room, watching the poison that might save my life drip slowly into my veins, surrounded by other patients with their supportive family members. The nurse, Maria, had become more attentive to my needs than my own children, adjusting my blanket and bringing me warm tea without being asked. "No family today either, Mrs. Wilson?" she asked gently. "They're very busy," I replied automatically, the excuse worn and thin even to my own ears. Maria checked my IV line, her movements efficient but kind. You know, my mother always said you discover who truly loves you during 3 times. When you're sick, when you're broke, and when you're dying. Her words hit me with the force of truth. I was experiencing at least 2 of those conditions, and the revelation of who truly cared was both painful and freeing. As the drugs flowed into my body, a plan began to form in my mind. The next day, I called my lawyer, Benjamin Goldman. Ben had been Robert's college roommate and our family attorney for decades. He arrived at my house that afternoon, concern evident on his lined face when he saw how much weight I'd lost since our last meeting. "Kathy, you should have called me sooner. I would have come to you," he said, setting his briefcase on the dining table. I poured us both tea from the service Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary. My hands shook slightly, but I managed not to spill. "I need to make some changes, Ben, to the will, to my financial arrangements, and I need your advice on how to do it properly." Ben's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the questions in his eyes. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" I took a deep breath. I want to protect myself while I'm still alive, and I want to ensure my legacy goes to those who truly deserve it. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything: the abandoned promises of support, the financial requests, Patricia's attempt to claim the lake house. Ben took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his expression growing darker with each revelation. I had no idea things had gotten this bad, Kathy. Robert would be furious. "Robert isn't here," I said simply, "and I need to handle this myself." Ben nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Here's what we can do." The plan we devised was both legally sound and emotionally satisfying. First, Ben helped me establish a healthcare directive and financial power of attorney, naming him as my representative rather than my children. Then we created a living trust to protect my assets during my lifetime, with strict conditions for disbursement. Most importantly, we rewrote my will. The lake house would still go to Michael and Jessica, but only if they personally spent at least 2 weeks each year there, together as a family. My financial assets would be divided, but not equally and not immediately. A significant portion would go to cancer research and to the nursing staff who had shown me more compassion than my own family. The remainder would be placed in trusts for my grandchildren's education, accessible only when they reached college age, with no ability for their parents to control the funds. "Are you sure about this, Kathy?" Ben asked when we had finalized the documents. "It might cause a rift in the family." I smiled sadly. "The rift is already there, Ben. They just don't know I've seen it yet." The next phase of my plan required patience. When Jessica called the following week asking about borrowing money for a kitchen renovation, I agreed without hesitation. When Michael pressed about private school tuition, I told him I was setting up a fund to cover it. When Patricia inquired again about the lake house, I said I was considering options. Let them think they had won. Let them believe my illness had made me pliable. Generous, easily manipulated. All the while, I was documenting everything. Every call, every text, every email. Ben helped me set up a system to record phone conversations legally. I kept a journal of who visited and for how long, who called just to check on me versus who called asking for something. The evidence mounted, and with it, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice and dignity, about not allowing my illness to make me a victim in more ways than one. Through the fall and into winter, my treatment continued. There were good days when I could almost forget I was sick, when I'd walk slowly through the neighborhood, nodding to Mrs. Abernathy tending her winter garden, or accepting Mr. Chen's offer to carry my groceries. There were terrible days when I couldn't leave the bathroom floor, when the pain and nausea seemed endless, when I wondered if fighting was even worth it anymore. But fight I did, not just against the cancer, but against the exploitation. I began to set boundaries, small at first. When Jessica called with another financial request, I asked simple questions. How are you planning to pay this back? Or, have you considered other options? Her stammered responses revealed how accustomed she'd become to seeing me as an ATM rather than a mother. With Michael, I became more direct. I notice you haven't asked about my treatment in the last 3 calls. Is there a reason for that? His embarrassment was palpable, his excuses transparent. Patricia, I handled differently. I invited her to lunch at a cafe near her house, making the effort despite my fatigue. Over soup I could barely taste, I slid a folder across the table. What's this? She asked, opening it to find copies of the original Lake House purchase agreement, along with recent valuations of the property. Documentation, I said calmly, of what belongs to whom, legally and morally. I thought you might want to review it before making any more suggestions about the cabin's future. Her face flushed, mouth opening and closing without words. Finally, she gathered her purse and stood. You've changed, Kathy. Yes, I agreed, remaining seated. Cancer will do that. So will betrayal. Winter turned to spring, and with it came unexpected news. My latest scans showed significant reduction in tumor size. The treatment was working better than anticipated. My oncologist, Dr. Brennan, was cautiously optimistic. We're not using the word remission yet, she warned, but we're heading in the right direction. You're responding exceptionally well to treatment. I sat in her office, staring at the scan images on her computer screen, trying to process what this meant. More time, more life, more opportunity to reclaim what cancer and family greed had tried to take from me. How long? I asked. Dr. Brennan smiled. Let's take it one step at a time. But I think we should start talking about long-term survival plans rather than just treatment management. I left her office with a lightness I hadn't felt in months. In the hospital parking lot, I called Ben. I need to accelerate our timeline, I said when he answered. And I want to make one more addition to the plan. The following weekend, I sent identical text messages to Jessica, Michael, and Patricia. Important family meeting at my house, Saturday at 2 p.m. Please make every effort to attend. It's about my future plans. The responses came quickly. Jessica, I'll be there. Everything okay? Michael, clearing my schedule now. Is it bad news? Patricia, of course. Do you need me to bring anything? The concern in their messages might have seemed genuine to an outsider. I knew better now. I could read between the lines to the real questions. Is the money at risk? Are you changing the will? Is there an inheritance to protect? Saturday arrived with perfect spring weather. I spent the morning in the garden Robert had loved, planting the tomato seedlings I might actually live to harvest. At noon, Miria, my chemotherapy nurse, arrived as arranged. Are you sure about this? She asked as she helped me set up the dining room. Family confrontations can be stressful, and stress isn't good for your recovery. I patted her hand. Some infections need to be lanced before healing can begin. At exactly 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Michael arrived first, alone, explaining that Vanessa had stayed home with the children. Jessica followed minutes later, her designer handbag matching her shoes, looking every inch the successful business consultant. Patricia was last, bringing an unnecessary casserole and forced cheer. They sat around the dining table, exchanging awkward small talk, clearly confused by Maria's presence, but too polite to ask directly. I let them simmer in their curiosity as I served tea from Robert's anniversary set. Thank you all for coming, I began, when everyone was settled. I wanted to discuss some changes I'm making in light of my health situation. Their expressions shifted to what I now recognized as rehearsed concern. Jessica reached for my hand across the table. Whatever you need, Mom, we're here for you. I gently withdrew my hand from hers. Are you, though? That's precisely what I want to discuss. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically laid out what the past 6 months had revealed. I produced the journal documenting visits, calls, and support, or lack thereof. I shared the financial requests that had come like clockwork, while actual assistance had dwindled to nothing. I played selected recordings of phone conversations where health inquiries were merely perfunctory preludes to asking for money. Their faces progressed from confusion to shock to defensive anger. Michael tried to interrupt several times, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said firmly. "There's more." I nodded to Maria, who produced a folder with my most recent medical reports. As my primary caregiver, since none of you have filled that role, Maria has been authorized to share my current prognosis. Maria cleared her throat. Mrs. Wilson has been responding exceptionally well to treatment. Her latest scans show over 70% reduction in tumor size, and her blood work is trending toward normal ranges. While we can't guarantee outcomes, her oncologist believes there is reason for significant optimism about long-term survival. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched emotions play across their faces, relief tinged with something else, calculation, recalibration of plans based on a mother who might not conveniently die soon after all. "That's wonderful news," Jessica finally said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "The best news," Michael agreed, staring at his hands. Patricia nodded vigorously. "God is good." "Yes," I said, "it is good news, and it has given me clarity about what I want for my remaining years, whether they're 2 or 20. I explained the changes to my will and financial arrangements, the trusts for the grandchildren's education that bypassed their parents, the charitable donations, the conditions placed on the Lake House inheritance. With each revelation, their expressions grew more strained, objections forming but not quite dared. "Why are you doing this?" Jessica finally asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Because cancer showed me who truly cares and who sees me as a resource to be depleted," I answered simply. "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself and ensuring my legacy reflects my values." "This isn't fair," Michael said, standing abruptly. "We've been dealing with our own lives, our own problems. You can't expect us to drop everything because you're sick." "I expected basic compassion," I corrected him. "Weekly calls that didn't involve asking for money. Occasional visits that lasted longer than 30 minutes. The bare minimum of what I gave you your entire life." Patricia, ever pragmatic, cut to her concern. "And the Lake House? You're really going to force them to use it together?" "It's not force. It's incentive. To remember their family, to give their children the same experiences Robert and I gave them. If they can't manage that, then perhaps they don't value it enough to inherit it." What followed was predictable. Denials, justifications, accusations that I was being manipulated by Maria or Ben, that the cancer had affected my judgment. I let them vent until the arguments began to circle back on themselves. "I think we're done for today," I said finally, standing with more strength than I'd felt in months. "You're welcome to visit any time. Really visit, not just check a box. You're welcome to call, to ask how I'm doing. Not what I can give you. The choice is yours." They left in various states of disarray. Jessica tearful but indignant, Michael coldly formal, Patricia muttering about ingratitude. When the door closed behind the last of them, Maria squeezed my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I nodded, surprised to find it was true. "I feel lighter, like I've put down a burden I didn't know I was carrying." The weeks that followed brought silence at first. No calls, no texts, no visits. I continued my treatment, planted my garden, and slowly began to reclaim pieces of my life that cancer had taken. I joined a support group for cancer patients, finding unexpected community among strangers who understood what my family did not. Then tentatively contact resumed. Jessica called on a Tuesday evening, asking genuinely about my health before mentioning anything else. Michael sent a text with photos of the children at their school play. Small gestures, hesitant reconnections. Patricia was the last to reach out, stopping by unannounced one afternoon in June. I was on the porch swing, reading in the sunshine, my hair beginning to grow back in soft silver patches. "You look better," she said, standing awkwardly at the bottom of the steps. "I feel better," I replied, marking my place in my book. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded, and we sat in semi-comfortable silence, watching chickadees at the feeder Robert had built. Finally, she spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said, about exploitation versus care. I didn't see it that way before." I waited, letting her find her words. "Robert was always the generous one, the peacemaker. When he died, I think we all took advantage of that part of you that reminded us of him. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more self-awareness than I'd expected. We talked for over an hour, more honestly than we had in years. When she left, something had shifted between us, not healed completely, but no longer festering. By the end of summer, my treatment protocol changed to maintenance rather than aggressive intervention. My hair grew enough to abandon the scarves. I could eat normal meals again, taste the tomatoes from my garden, enjoy the occasional glass of wine on the porch. Jessica began visiting every other weekend, sometimes with Madison, who showed genuine interest in my recovery. Michael called more regularly and twice brought the children for Sunday dinner. The conversations were sometimes strained, the new boundaries still being tested. But there was effort, genuine effort. One weekend in early fall, I suggested we all go to the lake house. Just for the day, I said, to remember what it means to us. They agreed with surprising readiness. On a golden Saturday morning, we drove the familiar road to Lake Champlain. The cabin stood as it always had. Weathered gray cedar shingles, blue shutters needing paint, the dock stretching into water that reflected the turning leaves. We spent the day cleaning cobwebs from corners, airing out rooms, reminiscing about summers past. Jessica found her old swimsuit still in a drawer. Michael discovered fishing tackle Robert had organized decades ago. They bickered lightly over whose initials were whose on the porch rail, laughed at embarrassing childhood stories, and for brief moments became the family I remembered. As the sun began to set, we gathered on the dock. I'd brought Robert's ashes, kept in a simple wooden box on our mantel for the past 3 years. "I think it's time," I said, opening the box. He always loved this place, most at sunset. Together, my children and I scattered Robert's ashes into the lake he'd loved, watching as they merged with the water reflecting crimson and gold. We stood in silence, arms around each other, connected by loss and memory and the tentative rebirth of something we'd nearly destroyed. That evening back at home, I sat at Robert's desk and updated my journal. Not with grievances this time, but with observations. Jessica helping with dishes without being asked. Michael fixing the loose porch rail that had bothered me for months. Small acts of care that cancer had taught me to recognize and value. 2 years fighting cancer had taught me hard lessons about family, about love versus obligation, about standing up for myself even when it hurt. My phone still rang, but now sometimes it was just to talk, to share, to connect. The future remained uncertain. Cancer has a way of teaching that lesson thoroughly. But I faced it with newfound clarity and unexpected peace. As I closed my journal, I whispered to Robert's memory, "You would be proud, I think. Not of them, necessarily, or even of me, but of the truth finally spoken between us all." Outside my window, the first leaves were beginning to fall, golden in the fading light. Another season turning, another chance to get it right. I'd fought for my life in more ways than one, and regardless of how many years remained, I would live them with the dignity and self-respect the cancer had nearly taken, but ultimately given back. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.